The person I'm going to talk about, I would previously have said, is a violent, psychopathic, murderous predator. But apparently if I was to say that, I'd be wrong, and we'll see why in a minute. But let me read you the article at NewYorkDailyNews.com. Maria Lecazo was arrested after police said she murdered and decapitated her abusive husband before scattering his remains across Mexico City. She faces life in prison. That's the summary. A psychologist who murdered and decapitated her abusive husband before scattering his remains across Mexico City sent text messages from his phone so his friends and family would think he was still alive. So after the murder, she is still keeping it together, is thinking rationally, is making clear-headed decisions about getting away with it. She's got his phone and she's sending people text messages to perpetrate the idea that he's not a deceased and dismembered and distributed body. But this next paragraph is beautiful. Long-suffering Maria Lecazo, 40, who claimed she had been repeatedly beaten by her husband, 41 years old, drugged him by slipping sleeping pills into his drink at their home in the Mexico capital. She then took his chainsaw and chopped his body up, stuffing his remains inside black bin liners and depositing them around the city. Police launched an investigation after children discovered his head while playing at a local park. His hands and feet were found in other parts of the city. So, I'm not going to read the rest of the article, but I am going to read the last part. She talks a little, they talk about what the police were making statements, forensic examination, etc. And the police spokesman said the following. She then tried to have herself sectioned, which means declared mentally incompetent, using her knowledge of mental illness as a psychologist so she wouldn't have to stand trial for her husband's murder. But we had, and this is the police psychologist quote continuing, but we had a doctor carry out tests, and she is of perfectly sane mind, end quote. This isn't a psychopathic, mentally deranged, predatory killer. This is a perfectly sane and normal woman who also happens to be a violent, predatory killer. Let that sink in for a minute. This isn't a person with mental aberrations. This is a psychologically normal woman. This is average Western woman with a psychology degree. She's been to university. Presumably she has a reasonably good job working in some sort of a medical or healthcare or mental health care facility. And for her, assuming just for the sake of argument that the story of physical abuse from her now dead and dismembered husband, assuming that story, that she was repeatedly beaten by him, is true. Let's just, for the moment, let's take that as read. Yes, he beat her up. Well, why didn't she leave? It's not like she was dependent on him. She had a psychology degree, and we assume some sort of a decent job, or at least the ability to get one. Why didn't she leave? Why, if she was beaten by him, did she not motherfucking leave? Why was it a better option to drug him and then cut his body into pieces with a chainsaw? Well, because we now inhabit a culture, the culture of the West, where for many women, murder appears to be more convenient than the incredible difficulty of breaking up a relationship and going your separate ways peacefully. Now, we don't have Elizabeth Sheehy entirely to thank for this, but she is certainly a leading light in this trend. And remember, this isn't a person with mental aberrations. This is a person who was examined by a mental health professional, and according to the police spokesman, we had a doctor carry out tests, and she is of perfectly sane mind. This is every woman. What is the difference between this one and the one that you're going out to dinner with tonight or sleeping beside? I will argue only circumstance. The only difference is circumstance. But I'm not here to trash all women? What I want to point out is what is mentioned earlier in this article. The second paragraph, which I will read again. Long-suffering Maria Lecazo, 40, who claimed she had been repeatedly beaten by her husband. Long-suffering. This article isn't even putting the dead man on trial. It is simply convicting him post facto after the death. He is convicted of being a violent, woman-beating bad guy after he's been killed. Do you know what that is? That's medieval thinking. Like in the Middle Ages, when an incoming pope would have the body of the outgoing pope exhumed and then put on trial for heresy and perhaps whipped for his crimes. Putting a dead person on trial is medieval thinking. It is primitive mind. And yet we see this repeatedly in modern reporting. Long-suffering, who claimed she had been repeatedly beaten. I don't think there was any violence from him. I think this was a violent relationship where she was the primary aggressor. It makes as much sense as what is written down in this article. But of course, she's the victim. She's the victim, while he's in pieces distributed across Mexico City, cut up with a fucking chainsaw. We had a doctor carry out tests, and she's of perfectly sane mind.